All right, there was a lot that top government whistleblower David Grush said I can't say publicly at today's congressional UFO hearing. But the members of Congress who held the hearing were denied a SCIF, which is a place where you can hear classified information. So what's that about? He did, Grush, however, make perfectly clear that the government is withholding information and that the government has taken big steps, maybe dangerous steps, to conceal a cover-up. Listen.
Do you have any personal knowledge of people who have been harmed or injured in efforts to cover up or conceal these extraterrestrial technology?
Yes. Personally.
Have anyone been murdered that you would that you know of or have heard of, I guess?
I have to be careful asking that question. I directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities.
What does that mean? Not the part about what he did with the question, but like, what do you mean? What do you mean that people have been hurt? To cover up what and why? Are we talking about like extraterrestrial life, or are we talking about what makes more sense to me, at least, which is military operations and things that they don't want us to know about, rightly or wrongly? Investigative journalist Michael Shellenberger, been on top of this from jump, joins me now. What was your takeaway from today?
Hey, Chris, good to be with you. I think it was a very exciting day, and I think we should all just recognize what a remarkable moment this was. Even if you don't think there's anything to this, even if you think there's a completely earthly explanation, the fact that this is coming out publicly, we and others have pointed to a long record of people being threatened for simply having reported, having seen objects they couldn't identify, anomalous phenomena. You saw Grush there saying that he himself had felt threatened. He and his wife had felt that their lives were in danger. I think everybody's a lot safer tonight with the public attention on this. I compliment NewsNation. You guys have done the best job by far of anybody of covering this. So I'm very happy. I think that even if this is, again, a very banal explanation, I think we are in a position now to hold the military and the intelligence and the security organizations that are supposed to respond to us as civilians in our democracy much more able to hold them to account. And I think we should all feel really good about that. There's a lot more work to be done, but I think you can see, Burchett and Luna are very impressive, and they're really going to get to the bottom of this. And obviously they keep encountering obstacles. Whenever they do, they go on television and they surface them. And that's a real change from what we've seen over the last 75 years.
It's nice to see Congress doing actual oversight with a hearing versus what Adam Carolla accurately and hysterically referred to on the show last night as mommy and daddy fighting, and the rest of us saying we just want to be safe and them telling us to shut up, which is what I see so much of the investigation of each side's opponents. I think that the simple answer is we don't have any reason to believe it's about extraterrestrial life. That's okay. I'm open on that, but that's about empiricism, and we don't have any steps in that direction yet. Two is that it's about things that are too dangerous to talk about. Now, if that's true, I don't believe that the simple explanation is, and we will not be safe if you ever know any of this. I don't buy that. And, Leland and I were talking before the show about the Manhattan Project and how, that was really quiet. There wasn't any. Yeah, that's right. And we dropped 2 massive bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki without any real philosophical discussion about whether we should just because we could. And that's where I'm headed with this. They have to do better at addressing the American people's ownership of their activities. How do we get there?
Well, I thought Grush laid a path towards it. He said today very specifically that he knows where these non-human intelligent vehicles, these UAPs, are being stored at either U.S. military bases or with military contractors. That was, in my understanding, that was completely new. He offered to share that information with members of Congress, so we now have places that members of Congress can go to investigate directly. If they're blocked, then we know those members of Congress will see them come back on television. But I think to the point of secrecy sometimes is necessary, as we saw in some cases of wartime. But for the most part, when you're talking about very sophisticated military projects, such as the stealth bomber or the Strategic Defense Initiative, which Reagan initiated. These were publicly discussed. These were overseen by Congress. There were people, members of Congress, that were cleared to view them. And of course, you may remember, those of us who are old enough to remember, we remember that the Strategic Defense Initiative to shoot down nuclear weapons was heavily debated in the United States.
Hey, thank you for watching. Please go to newsnationnow.com, newsnationnow.com, and you can find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button down below. Then you will get more of NewsNation's fact-driven coverage.